just to say welcome and thank you very much for joining us for this launch event for the final evaluation report from the Power to Change Empowering Places programme. I'm just going to start by spending a few minutes introducing the programme and the panel of speakers joining us today, and quickly outline how the event is going to work. So my name is Natalie White. I'm a portfolio manager at Power to Change. We are the independent trust that strengthens communities through community business in England. Empowering Places was a pioneering 5-year place-based funding programme that ran from 2017 to 2022. It was funded by Power to Change and delivered in partnership with Cooperatives UK, NEF, the New Economics Foundation, and CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategy. The aim of the programme was to test the idea that kickstarting and nurturing clusters of community businesses can actively tackle local needs and economic inequality in areas that are experiencing high deprivation across England. So it took much of what Power to Change knew about supporting and developing community businesses from our national programmes such as Bright Ideas and applied this to the context of place. So we worked at neighbourhood, hyper-local sort of ward level in 6 places, and the places were Plymouth, Hartlepool, Leicester, Bradford, Wigan and Grimsby. And the approach of the programme was to build the capacity of locally rooted community anchor type organisations, which we called catalysts. So the idea was to strengthen these organisations in each of the area to seed new community businesses. And each catalyst was provided with a blend of investment, which was up to £1 million over the 5 years. And this was made up of a combination of grant funding, a generous capacity support budget, access to experts and mentors, as well as to a peer learning programme. But the programme's been very much led by the needs and the interests of each of the places. So catalysts have been working with their communities to understand local needs and business opportunities. However, at the same time, the programme has also worked to nurture a strong sense of curiosity across all 6 places and the programme partners about what the shared learning and connections might be across the places, despite their quite different contexts, starting points, and approaches. So since year 3 of the programme, we've worked with Renacy, who've played the role of an embedded evaluator on the programme. Renacy have taken a developmental approach to the evaluation, producing a series of outputs that Power to Change and our partners have been able to draw on to better understand the programme and make adjustments to the programme as we went along, whilst also providing that wider learning about what it means to work well in place and how community businesses can drive local change. So I'm really pleased today to be joined by Lily O'Flynn, who is the Principal Consultant for Place-Based Evaluation and Learning at Renacy. And Lily is going to be presenting some of the key insights and learning from the 6th and final evaluation report. We also have Sasha Bedding, who's the Chief Executive of the Wharton Trust, based in the Dyke House ward of Hartlepool. The Wharton Trust was one of the 6 Empowering Places Catalyst organisations. So Sasha's, after Lily, is going to be telling us a bit more about their approach to delivering Empowering Places in Dyke House and what sort of impact the programme has been having in that area. And finally, we're going to hear from Jo Blundell, who is the co-lead at Place Matters, a partnership committed to accelerating the impact of place-based change through learning. Place Matters have also been convening the Empowering Places Community of Practice for the past 2 years. So Jo is going to reflect on some of the learning from the programme and also bring some of those insights from convening that group. So after we've heard from all the speakers, we'll have time for some Q&A. So do put your questions in the Q&A box as we go along. We've got about an hour, which isn't loads of time, but I'll make sure we do have some time to answer some of your questions. And yeah, I will pass over to Lily now. Hopefully those slides will appear in a moment. Oops.
Thanks very much, Natalie. So I have got the challenging task of condensing 5 years of a very complex place-based programme into 20 minutes, but I think I can do it. And I'm actually going to start with a very complex diagram to help me do this. So the first slide, obviously I'm not going to go into this in detail, but it really shows just how complex the program has been. It's been a 5-year place-based program. It's had a number of different inputs from Empowering Places, but also from the Catalyst organisations who have kind of driven the program in each area. But it's been much more than that. It's been kind of their connections with other organisations across the local area. It's been how they've interacted with people. It's been how they've built trust, confidence, relationships, and so on. That's kind of got us from the starting point, which was 6 communities in areas of high deprivation, lacking investment opportunities, to the end point, which is about individuals who've been who are now more confident, resilient, and enterprising, willing to take ownership of local solutions, and communities which have better access to services, increased amenities, and opportunities to get into good work. I should say up front, this diagram is included in the report, and so do feel free to delve into it in much more detail than I'll go into it today. It's not, it isn't an individual journey of change. Each catalyst approached the program so differently in each area, and this is a kind of catch-all. It shows the broad journey from the starting point to the end point. The main purpose of showing this is to show just how complex this journey of change has been. So every bit of change has been contingent on other change happening, although there were some standardized inputs, such as the funding and the capacity building that Natalie mentioned. It isn't because of those inputs alone that the change has happened. The program's created a steady momentum around change, which we just couldn't have predicted at the outset. So the outcomes we were measuring when we first came on as an evaluator have been completely eradicated, and we started measuring new things, I think about 1.5 years ago, when we realised that actually change looked very different from how it was predicted at the beginning. So as someone who'd like to do a program like this in future, I think the lessons are to being really willing and open to emergent change, and knowing that you can't just kind of settle on an idea and decide you're going to deliver it when you're working in a place. It depends on so many other contingent factors and actors and people you work with, and how engaged your community are already, and so on. And I'm sure Power to Change won't mind me saying, but Empowering Places didn't set out, or didn't achieve some of the goals it set out to achieve, such as increasing employment and making areas less deprived. But what it actually did do was create life-changing outcomes for people who were involved, and better ecosystems of support and infrastructure for local people moving forward and in years to come. So the results of the Empowering Places programme at the moment are brilliant when you look at the change, but we're not going to know how much this infrastructure has had an impact on people, and for another kind of 5 to 10 years time at least. So it still might achieve those original goals. So I'll move on to the community businesses. So just a kind of quick overview of numbers. So there was 85 people who were supported over the 5-year programme, people, groups or organisations to develop their community business ideas. The numbers varied a lot from place to place because each catalyst took a different approach and had a different starting point. So for example, Centre 4 in Grimsby had over 100 staff, where Maiden Manningham had 3. And in terms of assets, Be Inspired in Leicester has over 10 million, whereas Wigan has, they have 1 building, which is on a 25-year lease from the council. So we're looking at kind of very different organisations who came into this at very different points, and that meant some repurposed their money to do kind of drive what they were already doing. And some had to start from scratch in this work, which took a lot longer. They also used different approaches to using the money. So Be Inspired in Leicester and the Wharton Trust in Hartlip all kind of set out to create clusters or ecosystems of mutually beneficial support, mutually supportive community businesses, and therefore focus more on kind of doing more with fewer organisations. You can see they've got 8 to 10 in those areas. Whereas Real Ideas and Made in Manningham were already set up to support entrepreneurs and drive them to thrive and improve community business ideas. And so they were able to support lots of new and existing community businesses to do this. So the model works differently in the different areas, but it's led to kind of a really excellent ecosystem of community businesses and support for community businesses in each area. I'll touch briefly on the 3 models for catalysing. There's incubation, community-led, and entrepreneurialism. So incubation was where a catalyst houses and sets up and staffs a community business to address specific need in the community. So, for example, in Grimsby, there was they set up an ethical recruitment agency, ERA, to address kind of long-standing issues around unemployment in the area. And in Leicester, Be Inspired set up a bar to give people somewhere to socialise, which is something they hadn't had in the community at all. They also set up a football pitch and a football club. In terms of being community-led, that's where people with ideas are supported to develop those ideas into community businesses. So these were much more kind of grassroots ideas. So, for example, there was a community business in Wigan called Misplaces, which brings women together to make creative things to sell or just to come together and enjoy themselves and have social time. And then finally, entrepreneurialism, which is about supporting existing community businesses or social enterprises or people with advanced ideas to thrive. So, for example, there was a brewery in Plymouth. There was also a yoga loft in Plymouth, which were both supported. These are kind of often ideas which are kind of set up as a business before they were kind of advanced to support the community as well. So there's positives and negatives to each model, as there is anything. So some are more risky but more empowering, such as being community-led. Some are less risky, but can create reliance, such as incubation. So we did see that because they were incubated by the catalyst, sometimes their model hadn't advanced enough to kind of create their own business plan and be sustainable on their own, because they were used to being kind of hosted by another organization. And some have more or less community impact. So entrepreneurialism sometimes struggled to have the same amount of impact as some of the other models. We'll move on to the change. So this is the change framework that we created about a year and a half ago when we decided the current outcome measures weren't working. We co-created this with catalysts around what we were finding. And this really sets out to show the process for change. So those little blobs are the kind of the change itself, the impact, but we wanted to show the kind of activators or enablers for change as well. So what was creating that change and why? We wanted to be able to understand the change that was being created rather than say this happened. It's so important in a 5-year program to understand the kind of the progress towards change and why it was happening, so that we could feed that back to catalysts and to Power to Change in real time. So we found that change had to come from the outside in. So those are the arrows going in. Those are the things that come from the program, but also from the inside out. So the catalyst had to kind of be inspiring change throughout, through motivation, empowerment, support, connecting and building trust. And we saw change happening at 3 different levels. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these. So at the kind of micro level, the community level, we saw people growing in confidence who were directly involved in the programme. We saw a growth in empowerment, so people were able to speak up more, have their voice heard. They wanted to get involved in local decisions or creating local businesses. So, for example, in Wigan, they have a community forum which residents came to, and at first were kind of supported to think about new ideas, and now they do that independently. We also saw growth in pride and improved reputation. So people were actually travelling to these areas for the first time from outside. And that was because of the local businesses that had set up. So, for example, there was a community farm in Grimsby that was set up, and also there was a park in Plymouth that people didn't use that much, but then a theatre popped up there, and people came along and used the park a lot more as they were kind of coming to the theatre. At a community business level, we've seen people grow in skills, knowledge and confidence. So they've got legal skills, they've developed skills in understanding governance structures, trading, creating business cases. And we've also seen them be able to kind of create better connections across each of their local places as well. And there's been a real impact of this mutually beneficial ecosystem. So being able to trade from each other, especially when they're housed in the same area. So many of them have got a kind of hub. So Centre 4 in Grimsby or the Grove in Leicester are hubs of community businesses. And they found that once people would come along to one business and then kind of use other businesses in the vicinity as well. And that really helped with the kind of the impact of the community businesses being able to trade when they were trading from each other, and also cross referrals. So in Hartlepool, there's a cafe called Lillian's Community Cafe, where they do a lot of trust building and talking to customers. They identify people with needs who can then be referred to other community businesses, such as a mental health support group called Minds for Men. And then finally, at a wider place level, so we've seen more connected ecosystems of businesses and businesses in charities and the whole sector being better connected. We've also seen a notable increase in amenities available, like local shops, cafes, food banks, green spaces, football pitches. We've seen more procurement through the local council and the NHS, and lots of examples of social prescribing, as well as the transfer of local assets into community hands. And I mean, most importantly at this level, new infrastructure in all of the places to support the continued generation of community businesses in these areas. And that's been one of the biggest outcomes of this programme, is how they will support the ongoing nature of this, which will then continue to support the local community and community businesses as well, those two other levels. So moving forward, I wanted to touch on the kind of that this is being done in a context of deprivation, which of course has risks, and risks around kind of future sustainability. This was always going to be a risky programme. So the idea that the programme would kind of select or help people in areas that were underinvested in, which lacked social capacity and social capital to kind of create new businesses, it is risky, and it's led to a number of challenges as well. And it's been a hard job for Catalysts, because they've had to identify people with unique combination of having spark, passion and potential, but they've also needed to build relationships, persuade people to do this, assess and mitigate risk on an ongoing basis, and provide relevant, timely, holistic support. The challenges which we've seen, personal, external, life cycle and availability of funding, in terms of personal challenges, we've seen some people having to borrow money to stay afloat, or having to quit jobs, or not having enough time to dedicate to the business because of other life pressures. We've seen some external challenges. So the kind of difficulty in securing assets or navigating complex bureaucratic systems. We've also, obviously, this has all happened in the context of COVID. And some of the local areas have also made trading more challenging. So people don't have a lot of money to spend, and it's hard to start a business in an area where you don't have social capital, and also you don't want to ask for money for people to attend services. That's been a real challenge. The challenge around life cycle is that there's been lots of support for setting up, but a lot less support for sustainment, and that's often the way with these types of programs, not only Empowering Places. And I think if we look at the diagram which shows the different business or life cycle stages, you can see that about half are closed or pre-venture or inception, so that kind of very early stage, and then about half are in the kind of growth and scale stage. But as the program now comes to an end, it is a big drop-off point for those that are in the earlier stages, or the 16 which float above inception and growth, who are in a real transition period and actually need a big investment of cash to be able to grow and to be able to scale, because it's often those ones who are in that transition period that are most at risk and often end up closing if they don't have the investment they need. So that's really big, and I think available funding is something that we're very aware of being a continued risk to the businesses and to the catalysts with Empowering Places coming to an end. I think the things that we have learned around that was that actually the businesses that were at the growth and scale stage were either an existing entity or they were incubated by the catalyst. So it's ones that already had a kind of existing network of support that have got there already. And the ones that have closed were often set up, I think it was 62% were set up by a person with an idea. So people with kind of less of a support network. So that takes much longer to get to that point. So although 5 years has been a long-term investment, it hasn't meant that all of them have got to that point. It's still early days for a lot of the businesses. However, catalysts do feel positive about sustainability on the whole. And the next phase will be about kind of diversifying income streams and developing ways to be more kind of procurable to local authorities and NHS trusts. And finally, this slide kind of touches on that. So what's needed moving forward? So from funders, we see capital investment to be critical, as I've said, also funding holistically. So really understanding the nuance of each place and providing bespoke funding. So do they have infrastructure in place already? Do they have assets in place? How can a funder actually respond to those needs to help them kind of specifically build things that will enable them to do this stuff better in future? So Empowering Places worked incredibly well in its flexibility, but actually funding even more holistically and focusing on real target areas could have really helped. And then creating time and investing in relationships was critical for Empowering Places. So core funding, backfilling time, allowing people in strategic positions to be able to take part in strategic conversations, and same with investing in relationships. And then for organisations like the Catalysts, it's been about kind of what's needed moving forward is being able to robustly evidence the impact, ensuring they can align with social and economic priorities, and potentially providing some consultancy, as well as continuing to focus on kind of place-based relationships in each of their places. And I will draw to a close there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lily. It's really insightful, and yeah, well done for squeezing that into 20 minutes, because yeah, there's so much rich learning and insights in that final report. So yes, thank you. And in the interest of time, I'm going to pass straight over to Sasha Bedding, who's going to talk more now about the Wharton Trust as a catalyst in Hartlepool. Thanks, Sasha.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. So I was just flicking through my emails when we started this program, and the first email inviting us to apply for a learning grant was the 20th of October 2016. So that's approaching, what, 7 years ago now. So it's been quite a journey. For those who don't know, Dyke House is it's about a square mile in Hartlepool of about 5,000 people. It faces the usual socioeconomic difficulties, which was partly why we were picked. I think we've got a relatively young population, which is helpful in some respects, but that's possibly to do with some of the life expectancy not being as high as we would want it to be. My organisation, the Wharton Trust, is known locally as the Annex, because the building that we're in is called the Annex, and we've been around about 30 years. And for the last 10 or 11 years, we've been on a journey to redefine what it means to be an anchor organisation locally. So we shifted from being a provider to being much more of a facilitator, looking to enable people to take action on things through adopting a community organising approach. And that approach was essentially at the heart of what we tried to do on this programme. And I think we've learned loads, and it's lovely to see that Lily's put lots of it down, actually. But I think what we found probably the most important is at the start of this, when we pitched to get this investment, we asked a question of ourselves, really, that when we go out and we do organising and we listen, we have conversations with local residents. We start with, what do you love about where you live? And then the next question is, what don't you like so much? And then the third question is, well, what are you going to do about it? And actually what we wondered was actually what you don't like about where you live. How much of that can be a proxy for where the market's failed? And if they have failed, and that is what the conversation actually is about, what can we do about that? And that would then ask the question of actually, does that work, and can what we do make sense at a local level? And actually what we found is that actually in a lot of cases it is. So how do we address what those conversations lend itself to? Well, mostly it's social action. Most of the things that people come up with, what they don't like and how they can address it, is about social action. Sometimes it's projects, and occasionally there is space for a community business to be formed out of that. And so understanding this process, organising at a deep and level, has enabled us to do a number of things. First thing it's done is been able to refine how we support local people to take action on those things that they care about. And it's enabled us as an organisation to refine the skills that we need from our staff team to facilitate this, which is great, because it means that we run on a relatively small budget, which means that we don't really necessarily go looking for huge amounts of resources to fund the organisation, and spend much more time working outside of the place with people who live locally, which is really the most, it's obviously the most important bit. But sometimes when our organisations grow and we scale up rather than scale deeper, we end up around that institutional survival, and we're at a point where we've got less of that now. So an example of where this kind of thing could work was, I mean, last week we have a number of local residents have got together in a small part of the neighbourhood, looking at the rising criminality. It's mostly linked to drugs. And obviously people are nervous about doing anything as an individual in fear of reprisals. So what we're going to do is we're going to reconnect a social action project about launching 1,000 eye campaigns, where every home will have given the opportunity to put a set of eyes in the window, so like, we're watching you, or words to that effect. But there'll be a project side of that about working with the police to ensure that they improve their response time. So when they're getting community-led intelligence about where the dealing is taking place and so on, they'll respond quicker. But that's probably as far as it goes. There probably isn't really scope for a community business. And so this sense of like, where do we need to invest time, resources, energy, and support gets filtered quite quickly through that lens of where do we end up with a community business. Whereas with the housing issue, and the deterioration of mental and physical well-being, the lack of cultural opportunities, we ended up with quite a wide range of community business opportunities. So, I mean, we'll start with the honesty bit. Not everything worked. I mean, Lily's pointed that out. Some people didn't make it beyond the drawing board. Some people didn't make it beyond the first year. And I thought, I think for us, the most interesting failure, for want of a better phrase, was where one community business was subsumed into another, who was outside of the scope of our program. So that activity still takes place, but under the umbrella of a different organisation now. So that's quite interesting. In the private sector, you wouldn't think twice about that taking place, but in our sector, it was like, oh, what's that about? Why have you nicked one of our community businesses? And it's not like that. It's actually just something it's really good, actually, I think. But we have, and Lily's pointing to, we've had some brilliant successes. Lillian's Cafe, which Trevor and Angela had an idea that they wanted to make a difference, one coffee at a time. And over the last 4 years, it has been an exceptional watch. And, they have completely revolutionized how we talk about mental happiness locally, from companionship to suicide prevention. Their cafe really lends itself to a different approach. I mean, Trevor was recently a finalist in the BBC Make a Difference campaign, and they've worked across with so many different other community businesses. And their strapline is around, like, it's all about buying a delicious coffee, so that they never lost sight of that trading element. And, where we've got so many tea rooms and so on closing because of the economic situation they're in, they're going from strength to strength. And it is because of their community business side to it, and the way they reinvest and talk about the good that they do in their cafe. Like Blooming Arts are now unbelievably like the creative and cultural lead for the entire town. But what they did is they took community organising, because there is an issue about participation in arts. So they took a community organising approach to their cultural sector, so that they didn't just put any old piece of artwork on. They did it in terms of what they were hearing from their conversations with local people. And funnily enough, participation went up. Minds for Men, rather than scale more broadly, they've chosen to focus more exclusively on the Dyke House area, and they've won a number of contracts to deliver wellbeing activities. So they have a women's breakfast group and 2 evenings of support and other stuff. And after having a bit of they've got somebody now where they're looking at diversionary activities for people with addiction issues. So, as a really tiny example, they're doing, Scott he's a joiner by trade, but he has alcohol dependency issues. So to stop him wanting to have a drink, he's making planters, which contributes to make Dyke House beautiful. And then the money that they sell those planters on is reinvested back. Now it's tiny, but it may grow. But they've had a few issues of their own, and they had to close their community shop, but now they're going to reopen it again, hopefully in the next 3 months. So, there is ups and downs in the life cycle of any business. And with the support, though, they've been able to sustain a minimum level of service and then re-go again. Hartlepool Ambulance Charities continue to win contracts, deliver training, and they uses that money to patrol on the nighttime economy locally and a bit further out into the town centre, because we border the town centre area. And our own annex housing scheme, we've now got 6 homes with a couple more in the pipeline. So we intended to get 8, and we're going to have 8. Our vision is to have a home on every street and an organiser in every home. And all our tenants who are in the current properties, they're all committed to social action, which is fantastic. So that vision of transforming a place from within by living in a stable home with a good landlord is beginning to bear fruit. And what's really interesting is our Hartlepool Borough Council are finally looking at their social housing policy, because they're getting ripped off by providers who aren't doing a very good job with the people who need the support, but they masquerade as local when in fact they aren't. So the money, the £1,000 a month that we pay, goes to the Midlands as opposed to sticks in a local community organisation. So I think what it says is that you know, the market will dictate where you end up and the scale of what you're doing. So what's worked really well is power to change. Lily's captured a lot of this. Power to change have been brilliant. They've been flexible, and it seems cultural because Bonnie and Natalie have both worked in the same way. External support, you know, some of the technical advisors that we had working with the national partners were fantastic. I wish I could have understood Stuart McDonald from Clares far earlier, because it would have been 2 years better. I think probably on reflection, we could have had a bit more time together at the start of the programme. And also colleagues from other catalysts, they've been absolutely brilliant for us. Challenges, I think the biggest one for us here has been around Hartlepool Borough Council's. Our ambition is greater than their imagination, and they didn't really understand it for the last 5 years. There's evidence now that they're getting it, but it's 5 years wasted almost in terms of that structural and systemic change that we could have had. And the perma crises since 2016 don't help. You know, people have a lot on their plates, and to think about creating a community business in a time when people are struggling with general day-to-day living is a big ask of people. And for anybody to succeed in this, they've worked really hard. And the legacy of Empowering Places is really profound. We're a completely different organisation to what we were. We've been able to demonstrate that people can understand businesses for social good, which is terrific. Our community businesses still trade together. We're a million miles away, much more confident when you've got your own asset ownership and your own trading income. You have an awful lot more freedom to say what you actually think. Dyke House is better than better than it was. I mean, it's not perfect. There's still a long way to go. And so what we're going to do in terms of the long way to go is much more around, we've currently created our own prospectus about actually what our square mile needs over the next 10 years. It's evidence led. It combines what we've heard from local people plus the data which we've got through, you know, community lifestyle survey and all the other bit, and turns around and it creates a framework which recognises the importance of community organising, community anchors, community businesses and community governance, ultimately leading to community power. And it intertwined, those 5 themes all work together to demonstrate that actually at a hyper local level, with the right investment over the right time frame, you can make potentially one hell of a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. It's always really great to hear you speak and tell your story of working in Dyke House, because your organisation is so embedded in that community. So really interesting to hear your reflections there. And I'm going to pass over to Joe Blundell. We're at 22 now, but Joe's going to just spend the next 5 or 10 minutes reflecting on the learning and bringing some of those insights from the community of practice. So over to you, Joe.
Thank you so much. So I'll spend hopefully more like 5 minutes, so we've got plenty of time for a chat. But our job and our role has been to create a community of practice, which we did in the final year of the Empowering Places programme, and we're now part of the legacy of the programme that we continue. What has emerged is I think, paraphrasing Lily's report, but I think Empowering Places kind of started as a programme and ended up in creating a tribe. I think that's kind of a quote from one of the technical advisors, which I think is true. We help co-facilitate the final kind of learning camp for the teams, the 6 places that form part of Empowering Places. And what was very evident from that is that there have been incredibly strong relationships, that the learning journey that each of the places have been on has been sort of strengthened by the fact that they get together regularly, talk and support each other. And that's a really important part of the kind of legacy of the programme and how they'll continue to improve. And we're pleased to be carrying on that community of practice into the stages after the programme has ceased funding. What I'm going to draw on in this conversation is, in that final learning camp session, we asked ourselves as a programme a number of questions around what the value, perhaps the more hidden aspects of the value created by the programme were, and what were the things that needed to happen to accelerate the pace of change created by community businesses. So we ended up with a fairly sort of lengthy a lengthy list, which we then had the opportunity to share with other potential funders. So we actually brought together some funders and say, look, these are perhaps some things you haven't appreciated about the value of community business, and here they are. So I'm just going to pick out the headlines of that. So the first, these are no particular order, but in the first point is that the underbelly really of this work is the work that Catalyst were doing around community organising. So when we look at what's a community business, perhaps we think more obviously about the business support kind of work, the creating of physical hubs, etc. But what came through really strongly from people's collective view on what's important is that you need to start with that deep relationship with the community. And the reason for that is that the value of the community businesses was finding those people and those areas of opportunity that were really going to find people to create sort of entrepreneurs, perhaps people that wouldn't normally go into mainstream employment or find that as a particularly good option for them, and whose work would access other parts of the community that perhaps mainstream businesses don't engage with. So, for example, in Bradford, there's a fantastic story about the Bradford team reaching into the Muslim community, helping Muslim women create sports-based businesses for Muslim women. Now, that's both reaching a gap that would not otherwise be addressed by mainstream services or businesses, and also creating opportunities for those women that perhaps wouldn't participate in employment in other sort of ways, to create opportunities for them. So I think that's starting from a deep kind of embedded in the community and organising and reaching into those communities even before you create the kind of enterprises from them. There's also a big point about understanding the wealth, and I mean wealth in the broadest sense created by the businesses. This is one of the challenges, I think, with because it's a community business, we think about things classically in business terms. What's the success of a business in terms of its revenue, its profit, its sustainability, its access to market, all those things perhaps we're more used to seeing. But the wealth for community businesses is a great deal about creating that kind of depth of community fabric, the kind of creating facilities, providing things that aren't otherwise available to those communities. And as we kind of, Natalie mentioned it, as we kind of, or Lily, apologies, Lily, as making businesses more procurement ready, is also helping those that procure these sort of services, that fund them, understand the real underlying wealth that's created by the business over and above the kind of more obvious kind of metrics that we associate with businesses, and putting a proper value against that. Obviously, we've got social value now, which has become much more embedded in procurement, but community businesses have a special place in that. They are small businesses. They have much more reach and much more depth of impact in their local places. There's also a link between community democracy and community businesses, in terms of community businesses often help people by owning assets, also give them voice. And there's lots and lots of discussion around how people were empowered, had access to by convening with other community businesses, by being seen as people that have voice in their community, how they were much more influential and able to influence those people that hold power in local government and other areas of the public realm, how they were able to sort of amplify their voice and have much more influence on what was going to happen to their communities. So community business is a really important agent for community democracy, for neighbourhood democracy. We also looked at what the sort of funding landscape for community businesses, and colleagues have touched on that already, but there is something around the flexibility, this kind of liminal space between what a community business is. It's partly a business that's very much for purpose, for its community. It's motivated to work for its community, but it's also a business, and it sits in this intermediate space that is this between the kind of mainstream, how businesses get funded, and the kind of more usual grant funding for social sector organisations, but finding more sustainable and flexible ways of flexing between those two models as businesses emerge, and because the value they create plays to both ends of those things is really important. And I think what we reflected on is that is as Lily said, there are key risks in the life cycle of businesses where they do fall over. And what we, in our own reports, what we describe that as is that kind of move from side hustle, where businesses are doing things, people have come in to do something, they have an income from another source, and it's that tipping point between that phase of their growth into scaling and growing their businesses is a really, really difficult phase, and it's where they need a long-term and patient approach to the funding to allow them to get over those hurdles. So those are the main points that we found. So yeah, I'll hand back for some questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jo. If I can now ask all the panelists to turn their videos back on and bring themselves off mute. It is 1:48, so we've got about 10 minutes to answer questions before I wrap up. Please do add any to the Q&A function. I know we've got one in there at the moment, and I think there's a couple hidden in the chat, so we'll look at those first, and I've also got a few of my own to ask. So looking at Katie's question in the chat, Katie's asked if there are any follow-up programs planned based on the findings of this project, and if the existing social businesses supported during the project will continue to be supported to grow and develop. And I think sustainability has been a big theme for us, particularly in the latter half of the programme, and a challenge, and something we've certainly been trying to address and to avoid any sort of cliff edge of funding. So a lot of focus on ending well. Is Power to Change planning to run another £8 million funding programme like this? I think the short answer is no. However, I think what we've learned is that it's sometimes the smaller, more catalytic bits of funding that can have the most impact. And we've certainly, there's a lot that we've learned in terms of policies, and yeah, like I said, there's small bits that we will certainly be sort of exploring going forwards. And Sasha, I think I'd like to come to you in terms of how you're feeling about the sort of sustainability of the community businesses in Hartlepool, in terms of, yeah, whether you sort of have confidence in terms of their ability to continue to grow and develop beyond the scope of the programme.
Yeah, I mean, most of them will be fine because of the trading model and how they've adapted to what the current economic situation is. So they will be fine, I think. And there's also, you know, they've been part of this process as well, and so there is a mutual support as well. So that kind of community business network looking out for one another because they offer complementary activities means that when there is an opportunity for joint trading or joint commissioning, they take it.
Thanks, Sasha. And Lily, I know sustainability has been quite a key part of the evaluation. So I wonder if you have any reflections. I see there's another question that's come in as well around sustainability and the importance of trading for community business. So any reflections you have in terms of where the programme has got to on that point?
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of showed on that near end slide, I think the community businesses some of the community businesses have been able to scale and grow, but it takes such a long time for that to be able to happen. And actually, this program's really taught us about the kind of the length of time it takes and ongoing support, hand holding, funding, capacity building that's needed to be able to sustain community businesses. And actually, a lot of them are still in the very, very early stages. And without investment, I think it will be tricky for some of them. And I think some of them have almost got there, but then lost out on local authority procurement or whatever, and haven't been able to go on. So yeah, I think being able to diversify funding streams as much as possible will support with that. But it's a challenging time as well, and they're at a challenging position.
Thanks, Lily. And I think that question kind of leads me on to one of my own that I had in terms of the community business model. And Sasha, you've already alluded to this a little bit, but I suppose the community business model links up the sort of community and economy under one banner. So I wondered, in terms of sort of traction locally, and this perhaps brings you onto your point around the local authority, Sasha. Has it been difficult to bring sort of local people and partners on board with that community business model? Yeah, just your perspective on that.
I think local people understand it perfectly well. I think the difficulty is it doesn't fit the way that local authorities are set up to think about community and economics, and I think they need to understand that community business can be an economic anchor as much as a community anchor, and that shift in mindset would enable far more to take place, certainly locally, far more to take place in a more supportive environment, because I don't think they understand that even now. And being realistic, that the headspace to think about this stuff isn't there in a local authority necessarily. So when they're starting to do it now, when we haven't got the levels of external technical expertise we could have levered in the past. So that would be it for me. They have to understand that there is an economic imperative to support in community businesses, because they employ people from some of the most disadvantaged communities. Their economic bang for the buck is probably higher than other businesses. And I think, when I mean, part of our prospectus recognises that on 3 sides of Dyke House there is going to be tens of millions of levelling up funding spent. So how does that disproportionately benefit the residents of Dyke House, and what are the contracting opportunities that we have?
Thanks, Sasha. I think that's a really good point. And Joe, I wondered if you wanted to come in at all on any of the points that have been raised, or perhaps on what you think the sort of role of local authority should be in terms of supporting community businesses in place.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that we did actually is look at what was happening in Wigan in particular. I know Dave's on this call, that had what we thought was a very distinctive kind of attitude and relationship with its local sort of social and business and community business economy. And I know Sasha sort of looked ruefully at the kind of the distinction between the relationships that he's got locally. In fact, we brought a local council along, didn't we, to the learning session, and I'm hoping opened his eyes a little bit to the art of the possible. But I suppose the learning from somewhere like Wigan, it starts philosophically with the belief that the council is a steward, and it actually needs to devolve more sort of responsibility and power to its community. So Wigan starts from a very from a perspective that it believes in its community's ability to be trusted to provide to the community, and actually when you look at a relationship with your authority, if your authority starts there and wants to devolve power and responsibility to its community, you are in a much, much better position. And really that's the first battle, is demonstrating to the local authority that community businesses can deliver. So I think in that it's incumbent on us to have to my earlier point around what is the value, what is the wealth, to communicate those aspects of the wealth created by community businesses, which mainstream businesses, however they promise in social value to do X, Y, and Z, actually community businesses really have a much longer stake in their communities, and they provide a richness of value that many sort of national businesses really can't do. And it's actually in procurement terms and for local authorities to understand that value and deal with it properly in their procurement would be a big step forward for the future of community businesses to grow through those local economies.
Thank you, Joe. I think that's a really good point. And I think, there's a lot we can learn from how Wigan and Lee Community Charity have worked with the council in Wigan, certainly. I'm going to we've got, about 3 minutes left before I need to wrap up. So there's another question in the chat here that I'm going to take now. So it is, in hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently in the way you approach the 5-year programme? All the data you collected to monitor the level of change. So Lily, perhaps I'll come to you on the data point. I can just have a go at answering the first part of that question, though, from the perspective of the funder, with the caveat I wasn't around at the beginning, but from my understanding is that I think when we set out on the 5-year programme, we were we were very ambitious looking back in terms of how much funding and support we would deploy in years 1 and 2 of the programme. Whereas actually in years 1 and 2, I think it was all about creating relationships and building that trust that has been so central to the programme. And actually it was about building the capacity of organisations and places in order for them to have the capacity to draw down and build their capacity. So there's sort of a bit of work before the actual drawing down of the funding. And also I think probably in that year, you know, we would be first to say we probably cringe a little bit at some of the workshops we ran at that time. I have a feeling there might have been a workshop explaining community organising to Sasha, which is obviously we learned much more from Sasha. So I think there was a bit of a shift for us as a funder to move from all of that traditional, we have the knowledge, we're going to take it to places, to actually listening and understanding the places and their perspective, and being much more led by those places. Lily, I'll pass to you to pick up on the sort of second half of that question, or add anything else.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, I suppose in hindsight, what we would have done differently around data is to have not created a framework, such a detailed framework at the beginning of the programme, when we really didn't know where it was going, how it was going to evolve, how the catalysts and people involved in each place were going to be interacting with each other, and what that would lead to. And actually, when we did do the kind of the theory of change, or the change framework later in the programme, it was just so much more accurate in terms of what we understood to be changing in real time, and where people were going. But it takes, you know, 2 to 3 years to even get to the point of knowing where you're going, and to think about what you need to measure. So that would be our biggest lesson. I think the only other thing is that we found it hard to understand the impact on communities, because it was really hard to go in and just say, you know, find random people, and that's expensive, and it's not necessarily the best way to measure impact. So we did a lot of that through observations. We did some video ethnography. Power to Change also did a hyper-local community life survey to supplement the government's community life survey, which showed us a bit more about population level impact. But no, aside from that, I think we took a very qualitative approach, and we would do that again.
Great, thank you, Lily. I'm really sad to say that we're almost at time, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap things up in there, although, you know, I'm sure we could spend much more time discussing this, because there's so much that's obviously happened over the past 5 years, but really great to share a flavour of it today. I'll just close the session by thanking our speakers very, very much for spending their time today to come and share that reflection, and for the engagement with the audience and the questions we've had in the chat. I just wanted to share a few more outputs from the programme that were going to be coming out and released in the coming weeks and months. So firstly, Renese's updated place profiles will be shared this week, and these have been produced to be read alongside the main report. So if you enjoyed hearing from Sasha today, I highly recommend having a look at these reports as a deeper dive into individual places. Then at the end of the month, Lily mentioned the community life survey. So we'll be launching the final report looking at findings from Power to Change's hyper-local booster version of this survey, which is looking at the sort of impacts the programme has had in those 6 places across the wider place. And then finally, along with our partners at Cooperatives UK and Participate Projects, we'll be launching reports this autumn, which explore what we've learned from Empowering Places about providing more effective models of innovative place-based business support for the community business sector. So yeah, thank you again for everyone joining. My email address is there on the slide if anyone has any unanswered questions or would like to discuss the programme more, and do sign up to our newsletter to get the latest from Power to Change on our learning and programmes. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.